Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's good to see you again. Sorry if you missed me last week. I was a little bit under the weather and didn't really think I could find enough voice to talk through an episode. Today I was playing around with an idea for something to make this desktop a little bit more jazzy. So you will have seen the file additions when I talked about the Files app in a previous video, and you might be familiar with this FyneDesk setup that I've been using for a lot of my videos already. And I just felt that although the background is very nice, we're grateful to artists that contribute to the project, I wanted to do something that made better use of that background space. If you have multiple windows, you might have a desktop uncovered, or maybe it could be a useful place to keep track of data that you don't want to see all the time, so you don't want to put it into the sidebar and have it clutter up the experience. And so I'm going to work on desktop widgets. I've got a little bit of code started already that I'll talk you through, and we can see what's possible with what I've done so far. So I'll just return to Goland here. I've created a new package in the modules package called desk widgets. This is going to hold the code for the desktop widgets, and I started with the init. This is all that we need to register a new module with FyneDesk. You just call register module here and you pass in a little bit of metadata. I say what this module is called and I give it a constructor function. The new desktop widgets constructor is defined in this widgets file. It's a little bit more complex, but I'm just going to talk through it. There's nothing hugely difficult about what's going on here. It's just early setup. The module, like I said, has a constructor function. We'll see that in a moment. There's also a destroy if it needs to do any tidy up. And we do return the metadata again in case the instance needs to be interrogated. The main important thing is this screen area widget. If this function is present on a module, then it will be used to contribute to the desktop area, and it will be overlaid on top of the background, much like the files widget is already. For this demo, I haven't handled all of the remembering about where widgets would be. It's just a quick setup. So I'm going to have a new basic desk widget that handles just this label. So you can see the basic primitive is put a canvas object, a Fyne canvas object inside a desk widget. And then I've got also a helper for displaying a bar chart. I'm just saying that for a percentage, use this function to randomly return a number. So we can see on a refresh what it looks like when we have different numbers being displayed inside our little bar. So that's the two items I've chosen to demo this with. And then in my setup code here, when it's first created, I position them on screen at top left where the files aren't being shown, with an offset of 10 points just right and down from the previous one. Pretty straightforward stuff. Should be familiar to folk who have used Fyne for manual laying out before. And you can see here, I'm putting these items in a new container that doesn't have a layout, which means that the move and resize calls are going to be respected because there's no layout there to override how these things are positioned. My constructor function, this is the initialization. It's just returning the type so that it can find those other functions associated with it, and we return this generic module type. So the main meat of this is the desk widget. That's the thing that wraps the canvas object and makes it a desktop widget. So let's have a quick look at that code as well. So you can see here it is extending the base widget. If you've ever done a custom widget with Fyne, you'll know that that's the entry point. The content is going to be passed in through that constructor function we saw, this new desk widget. And I'm also storing frame, which is going to give us something to surround the widget when it's in editing mode. And then I've got some state here. I want to know if it is currently being edited so we can determine that interactions should happen and change the display. Is it being resized instead of moved around, because a desk widget could be resized or moved? And also, are we currently dragging? And I'll show you why that's useful. Don't forget to call extend base widget when you're setting up a custom widget. That makes sure that the internals know that you are sort of the parent, the super type of widget. Everything inside you is part of rendering what you've built. Create renderer, much like any widget, is where we bring all of the graphical state together to return to the UI how it should be drawn. At the bottom of this, you can see we're using new simple renderer, and that is a pre-built renderer type that just takes content and visually sends it to the screen. It's not dynamic, but in our case, it could be dynamic enough. I'm telling it to display two items stacked on top of each other, the content and the frame. Like I mentioned before, it's pretty straightforward. The content is being passed in. In fact, it was already set in our constructor. The frame is being constructed out of different components, which are the border, which I've called frame again, and a little resize icon. The border is just a rectangle with a transparent fill and a stroke that is the foreground color. We can ignore those deprecations, I'll talk about it another time. And the resize is a resize icon that is part of the window manager theme. So it's like icons in addition to the standard Fyne theme. And that is being added together so that the overall frame, which we hide and show, is a stack that contains the border frame, defined up here, and the resize. And I'm positioning that in the bottom right by using a horizontal box with a spacer at the top so that the content becomes at the bottom row, and then a V box with a spacer again so that the content is on the right hand side, which pushes our resize into the bottom right. And I've put a padded container around it to offset it from the stroke of the frame that we're drawing. And then I hide it because the widget is not editing by default. We want it just to appear as is. And of course our editing will be false by default because goes 0 value is the normal. So we've got the display, but I also want to handle the interaction. How are we going to manipulate this object on screen? Well, by using the draggable interface. You could see by this tap here, it is implementing the draggable interface in Fyne with dragged and drag end. So with dragged, I want to check, are we editing? If we're not, then it should absolutely be ignored. And then this is where the dragging flag comes in that I told you about. I use it to set up whether or not it's going to be resized. So if we haven't been dragging before, then check the position of the cursor, this position variable passed into the event. If we haven't been dragging before, and we are in the bottom right hand corner, a little bit of math there, then set the resize to true. And then we set dragging to true, so we don't do that check again until we have finished dragging, and then it will be rechecked next time. And if the mode of our interaction is to resize, as in if it's from the bottom right corner, then we will change the size, and we do that by adding the current size to the amount that was dragged. And if we're not resizing, then I'll move the widget instead. And when the drag ends, we're not dragging anymore, and I just reset that resize flag as well. Although, looking at the code, I don't think that is actually necessary. Well, we'll take that out. The other thing that I thought would be pretty useful is to be able to turn in and out of edit mode. Now, whether this is the right user interaction, I don't know, but just for the debugging, I thought we'll give it a try. So if you right click, that is a secondary tap on the item, then it changes its editing state. If it was currently being edited, then we say it isn't anymore, we hide the frame. And if it wasn't, we'll pop down to here, we'll say that it is now editing, we'll show the frame, and we'll refresh to make sure that the visuals update. That's pretty straightforward. Let me just show you what that really means. Because it's a window manager that we're creating here, it could be sometimes a little bit challenging to understand how it's all coming together. So there's a make file with make embed, and that helps us to see the whole window manager in an embedded window. So by running that, we're loading another, what you might call an X11 session through Zephyr, and this has the entire window manager. And you can see my test widget label and my bar are both loaded. And if I right click, then I can move and drag this text. It doesn't do much because the text is the same size. But if I take this bar and right click, I can drag and resize that. And you can see now we have a really big bar graph or chart that's showing the number in the middle, and the actual bar value is jumping up and down accordingly. It is just a random number between 0 and 100. Let me show you a little bit about how that bar is created whilst we're here. So I have another file, the last one in this package, just the new bar that I showed you before. It says what's the maximum number it could be, and each time I ask it what the data currently is, it will return a value with that function that we saw passed in, and that was a random number generator. You can imagine how that would be bound with the CPU usage or the memory free, for example. Here I make two rectangles. The background has one chosen color. I think that the custom theme for all widgets to be consistent is going to be important, so I'm not worrying about the actual colors in use here. We make another one for the bar. I set a sensible minimum size for the background just because it's the one that's static, and I want to make sure that our desktop widgets are at least manageable. And then I have my label, which is going to show the value on top, and I just set it to be monospace. Then I set up this little ticker here, a little go routine, and it basically gets the update and then sleeps for a second. Because this is a background function, I'm going to call find.do so that we can safely manipulate the data in the UI. I get the value by running that data function that's passed in, and then updating the label using setText. And then for the bar, I'm figuring out how high is the widget currently, and then how high should the bar be, because that is that height multiplied by the ratio if we divide the value that we've got by the maximum possible value. And then we just resize the bar and move it so that it's on the bottom compared to the background. Again, we're using resize and move. And that only works if we don't have a layout. And so you can see here where I set up the widget, the container is stacking the background with the bar, but the bar is inside a container that says I have no layout. Because the background is inside the stack, it will always be that full size, and the bar has to be managed directly. And then I put the label right in the center of that widget. And I use that same new desk widget wrapper to make this bar into a desktop widget. Let's have a look at that all again. And because this is just in the background, I can run the executable like an application. So inside the project, I could go to the FyneDesk folder and just simply run it. And here you could see it's running in an application. It's somewhat different. It's not actually a window manager, but it's loading all of the other functionality, and it's much faster and easier to iterate. And all the functionality we've added is here. So hopefully you could see how this could be really useful. If you want to, please do comment about what some standard widgets would be, and I'll see what they could be integrated with. I think that really it would be useful to edit these all in one go rather than one at a time. And also, if we have a lot of windows overlaying, it's going to get lost. So much like our search button here, I thought a show widgets button might be appropriate down here, and perhaps with a right click that could put them all into edit mode. Let me know what you think. Hopefully this functionality could be in over the Christmas period, and we could put some cool things like CPU monitors, internet usage, and things like this label may seem dull, but they could be sourced from a fortune file, or perhaps it could be a news ticker or something like that. Included with this edit mode would probably be a button for adding new widgets, and that's going to need a source of different types of widgets, not just these pieces of work in progress. Let me know what you think, and I'd be happy to add them all. And just to show that none of this was smoke and mirrors, what I thought I should probably do is install this. So if I go to the top of the project, again, A window manager is a little bit special, so I need to make install rather than simply Fyne install. It's not needed for a normal Fyne application, but just because we're building a system-wide window manager here, it's a little bit special. Now, if I just minimize this and restart, there are my widgets in real life. So you could see we were actually editing the code for the window manager live. Thanks so much for joining me again today. I hope that you've enjoyed looking a little bit at how we might add desktop widgets to the Fyne desktop. If you'd like to, please do visit some of my other sites. You can find my blog at andy.xyz or my backlog of videos on YouTube. Please do consider sponsoring me on Patreon. You get early access to videos like these, as well as a newsletter and the opportunity to interact with what's going on. And as of last week, you will also be able to get those stickers if you sign up to the sticker sponsor. So if you'd like to adorn them on your laptop, I will happily ship them to you. And of course, do check out our work at aptrix.ai if you're interested in making it possible to build apps for all platforms even quicker. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.